Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The map glowed faint red under the projector's hum. A valley stretched like an open wound across the screen, contour lines curling into narrow folds. The colonel's voice droned over it, rehearsed, confident, blind. Around the table the men nodded, their laughter sharp between sips of burnt coffee. And at the far end, half in shadow, Sergeant Elena Marquez sat with a pencil tucked behind her ear and a small green notebook balanced against her knee. She raised her hand once. Her question wasn't loud. "Sir, have we considered the ridges here?" she asked, finger tracing the folds on the digital terrain. "They'd have overlapping fields of fire if—" "Sergeant," the colonel interrupted, not even looking up. "You're here for comms, not strategy. Track logistics." A few chuckles drifted through the room, low, dismissive, practiced. Elena lowered her hand. "Yes, sir." Her eyes stayed on the map long after the projector clicked to the next slide. The valley's shape didn't change. The danger didn't soften. It was there, waiting in the silence between the lines. Outside, the Afghan sun hammered the compound, turning everything into the color of dust. Marines moved like machinery, shouting, laughing, checking gear, swapping insults that carried more comfort than cruelty. The air smelled of fuel, sweat, and the constant hum of a place too far from home and too close to danger. Elena walked through it quietly, head low, notebook under her arm. She passed groups of men clustered around Humvees, their words tapering off as she neared, their eyes following with that mix of curiosity and doubt she'd long stopped reacting to. She was the sniper they never wanted, the quota, the one they said had been added to the roster to make someone in Washington feel progressive. They called her dead weight. And for the most part she let them. At 5'3", she didn't look like the legend the Marines worshipped in their war stories. She didn't swagger, didn't brag, didn't drink. She listened. She studied. She cleaned her rifle like it was something holy. Each motion was a prayer. Wipe, oil, check, click. Every part of the weapon lived in her fingertips, the tension of the trigger, the whisper of the bolt sliding home. Her M40A5 wasn't just a rifle. It was memory, geometry, and discipline welded into steel. It was her only certainty in a world that kept moving her to the back of every room. She'd earned her sniper tab the hard way through the endless grind of training that chewed up bigger, louder men and spat them out. She had endured instructors who doubted her before she even took aim. And when she made the impossible shots, wind, elevation, distance, they chalked it up to luck. She never argued. She didn't need to. The rifle spoke for her. Now, months into deployment, no one asked her to speak at all. She wasn't assigned Overwatch or Recon. She wasn't on the list for operations requiring precision cover. Instead, she ran radio checks, logged supply drops, updated spreadsheets no one read. The kind of tasks meant to occupy someone too inconvenient to dismiss outright. But while the others spent their nights in the smoke pit, laughing about home or getting drunk on exhaustion, Elena sat in her bunk under the dim red light of a headlamp, tracing her own private maps. The notebook was thick now, pages warped with sweat and dust. On each one she'd drawn terrain sketches, valleys, ridges, ranges, copied from memory or satellite photos. Next to each drawing, notes about wind direction, elevation shifts, humidity, and light conditions. Every detail logged meticulously. It wasn't just practice. It was preparation for a moment she couldn't name but somehow knew was coming. In those pages she was seen, if only by herself. Still writing fairy tale-y, Sergeant. The voice belonged to Lance Corporal Vance, tall, broad, the kind of Marine who carried his rank like a belt buckle. He leaned against the doorframe, smirking. "You know the brass won't read your diary, right?" Elena didn't look up. "It's not for them." He snorted, walked off. "Yeah, we noticed." When the door swung shut behind him, she kept writing. Her pencil moved like her breath, steady, quiet, unstoppable. Her father used to say silence is the best kind of training. You can't control a battlefield, he'd tell her, but you can control your breathing. That was back in South Texas, before the war, before the Marines. The land there was flat and endless, and the air smelled like sunburned earth and mesquite. Her father, a retired Marine with a limp that told more stories than his words, had raised her to work before dawn and shoot before sunset. "Steady," he'd whisper when they lined up tin cans on the fence posts. "Don't force it. Let the shot surprise you." At 12, she could drop a row of cans at 50 yards without flinching. At 16, she was out shooting every hunter in 3 counties. When her father died in her senior year, it wasn't grief that broke her. It was the silence that followed, the absence of his voice when she steadied her breath. Joining the Marines wasn't rebellion. It was the only way she knew to keep hearing him. But the Corps had its own kind of silence, louder, colder, the kind that isolates. She learned quickly that her name carried less weight than her gender. Keep her in logistics. Don't risk the PR. Fine shooter but not combat material. It was always the same coded phrases, polite dismissals wrapped in military precision. Still she stayed, not to prove them wrong, but because she had nowhere else to aim that discipline. That morning she cleaned her rifle again, every part glinting in the dusty light, when the alarm tone from the main building echoed across the yard. A convoy briefing. She packed her gear and walked in, notebook ready. Inside, the air was thick with body heat and noise. The colonel pointed at the digital map again, tracing routes with a laser pen. "Routine sweep," he said. "Intel reports minimal hostiles. Objective is to clear and hold." Elena's eyes narrowed. The contours on the map told a different story. The approach routes were too narrow, the ridges too clean. High ground on 3 sides, perfect for an ambush. She could almost see it, the way the valley would trap sound and men alike. She hesitated, then raised her hand again. "Sir, this valley, the draw here, it could mask heavy positions. Maybe it's—" "Sergeant," he cut in, voice clipped. "Stick to your lane. Let the officers handle tactics." The laughter that followed was thin, but sharp enough to sting. Elena shut her notebook. The pencil marks she'd made cut across the map like a wound that would never heal. When the meeting broke, Marines filed out, helmets slung, energy high. "Easy day," someone said. "Quick in, quick out." The sound of confidence, the kind born from not knowing what you don't know. Elena stayed seated until the room emptied. Then she opened her notebook again and underlined one line 3 times. "Kill box geometry." Outside, the rumble of engines filled the air as transports lined up. Dust rose, shimmering like smoke. She stood at the edge of the lot, watching the battalion climb aboard, 480 Marines in all, laughing, shouting, alive. None of them aware they were driving into a trap she could see coming. Her orders were clear. Stay on base, monitor comms, track supplies. She was the background hum in someone else's story. But as the convoys rolled out and the dust swallowed them whole, something twisted inside her chest, not panic, not anger, but that quiet tightening she'd felt as a child when her father's voice guided her through a shot. Instinct, calculation, geometry. She could already see the way it would unfold. The ridges would light up first, controlled bursts to pin them down. Then the draw, the choke point. Mortars maybe, RPGs, no clean way out. And command would freeze, buried under the weight of protocol. Wait for air clearance, hold position, follow the book. But the book never bled. The sun dropped lower, and by nightfall the compound was quiet again. Only the hum of radios and the flicker of screens broke the silence. Elena sat at her desk, headset on, listening to the rhythm of check-ins. Convoy 1 green, Convoy 2 green, routine chatter until it was. A gap, a missed report, then static. She adjusted her headset. Repeat last transmission. Nothing. Then 2 voices over each other, jagged, frantic. Contact East Ridge, taking fire. Static swallowed the rest. More channels erupted, shouts, commands, screams. Elena's blood went cold. She turned toward the operations feed just as the drone footage flashed on screen, muzzle flares sparking from ridgelines. tracer rounds streaking through smoke. The valley was alive with chaos. The kill box had sprung exactly where she'd pointed on the map. The colonel leaned over the console, barking orders to hold position, to wait for air support. "It's too hot," someone said. "We can't drop ordnance within 200 meters." They spoke like bureaucrats, not men watching their brothers die. Alina stepped closer to the screen, counting bursts, marking angles in her head. "Sir, if we cut their anchors here." "Sergeant," the colonel snapped, "you're not authorized to speak." But she wasn't thinking about authorization anymore. She was thinking about trajectories, wind, elevation, and the range of her rifle. She could see it, the nest on the eastern spur, the pattern of fire. She knew exactly where to aim. Her hand found the zipper of her rifle case, almost without permission. "You're not going anywhere," the first sergeant warned. She looked at him, calm, steady. "I can end this." No one moved. Outside, the radio screamed again. "We're pinned, casualties mounting." Still no orders came. Alina slung her rifle over her shoulder. And this time, she didn't wait for permission. She walked past them, through the open door, into the hard white light. Dust swirled around her boots. The compound behind her fell silent, the kind of silence that fills the space when someone decides to stop waiting for someone else's courage. Her father's dog tag tapped softly against her chest with each step. It sounded small but steady, like a heartbeat reminding her who she was. She didn't look back. Not once. Because she already knew, the only way to break protocol was to follow the truth. And truth, like a bullet, only traveled one way. How far would you go when the rulebook tells you to stand still? The night had no moon, only the red smear of flares bleeding against the clouds far off in the valley. From the ridges came the muffled percussion of automatic fire, the earth itself trembling with the rhythm of it. Alina Marquez moved through the dark like she'd rehearsed it for years, low, deliberate, weight shifting with each breath. Her rifle hugged close to her chest, the sling cutting into her shoulder like a reminder. You chose this. Behind her, the compound shrank into a dull glow, full of men still waiting for someone to fix the unfixable. Ahead of her, the world dropped away into the kind of silence that swallows names and ranks alike. She knew the terrain. She traced it in her notebook until she could have walked it blind. The ridge she needed was 2 clicks northeast, a spine of rock that bent around the valley's lip like a claw. It wasn't far, but the climb would punish every mistake. The shale slid under her boots, the slope kicking loose stones that whispered down into nothing. Each movement had to be earned not just with strength but with patience. She paused often, letting the night's rhythm settle before she shifted again. Above her, the stars blurred into streaks of dust. Below, flashes of orange marked where 480 Marines were pinned in a bowl of fire. She could almost hear their voices even without the radio, the clipped panic, the disbelief, the prayers that came when training ended and survival began. She heard those sounds before, in another desert, another year, another mission the world had promised didn't exist. But that was a story buried in classified reports and erased files, the reason they called her Phantom 7 once, before the politics of optics turned her into a name no one wanted to remember. She didn't think about that now. She couldn't afford to. Memory was noise, and noise killed focus. Halfway up, she stopped to drink. The canteen water was warm, metallic. She let it roll down her throat slowly, eyes locked on the flickering horizon. Each burst of fire painted the valley for half a heartbeat, enough to read the terrain like a map made of light and death. She marked every ridge, every muzzle flash, every place where geometry could still be rewritten. Her father's dog tag clinked once against the rifle stock. She touched it habit, not ritual. "Steady," she whispered under her breath. "Slow trigger, let the shot surprise you." The climb steepened. Rocks scraped her palms, dust caked her uniform. The wind picked up, gusting from the west, quartering just like she'd recorded in her notebook 100 times. It meant her shots would drift 3 inches right at 900 meters. She filed it away automatically. Facts were anchors. Emotion could wait. When she finally reached the crest, she lay flat, chest heaving. The ridge dropped off sharply before curving down into the valley floor, giving her the perfect line of sight without exposing her silhouette. She crawled the last few feet, unpacking her bipod, setting the rifle down with reverence. Through the scope, the world narrowed to glass and crosshair. What she saw made her stomach twist. Convoy trucks burned like torches. Men crouched behind them, silhouettes jerking with each burst. Machine guns on the eastern and western spurs raked the ground with brutal precision. The enemy had prepared this, not an ambush, but a harvest. She watched one Marine sprint between vehicles, only to vanish mid-stride in a flash of dust. Another dragged a wounded man toward cover, crawling through dirt that exploded around him. Command back at the base would be quoting regulations right now, she knew. Too close for support, too dangerous to engage. She'd heard it all her career. Safety in paperwork, death in hesitation. Alina adjusted her scope. The nearest machine gun nest sat on a ledge of rock, its muzzle flash strobing like a heartbeat. 900 meters. Crosswind 3 knots left to right. Slight elevation gain. Easy math. She exhaled. The reticle steadied. One breath, one squeeze, the rifle whispered. Through the glass she watched the gunner fold backward, the weapon falling silent. For a second nothing moved. Then chaos shifted. Heads lifted. Confusion rippled through the lines. She chambered another round. A second team, RPGs this time, moved along the draw, one man lifting the launcher. She adjusted half a mil, waited for the wind lull, and sent another round. The man collapsed before his finger brushed the trigger. The rocket clattered harmlessly into the dirt. Voices on the radio crackled to life. Disbelief, hope, raw confusion. Command, we've got cover fire. Who's shooting? Negative on air support. Then what the hell is that? Alina didn't answer. She was too busy keeping them alive. She shifted 2 meters left, dragging her body over the rock to change her firing angle. Sniper glints flared on the opposite ridge, the enemy searching for her. She pressed herself flat, counting seconds between their sweeps. Each heartbeat stretched thin as wire. A round snapped past her cheek, hissing into the stone behind, too close. She breathed through it, waited. Patience wasn't passivity, it was timing. When their muzzle flashes betrayed them, she answered one shot, then another. The glints died out. Silence reclaimed the ridge for a moment. She let herself breathe again, just once. Below, the Marines began to move small shifts, squads crawling toward whatever cover they could find. The kill box wasn't broken yet, but the pattern was faltering. The enemy had lost rhythm. That was all she needed. Another burst from the western spur drew her scope. 2 figures behind a mounted gun, sweeping fire toward the extraction route. She dialed windage, compensated for the mirage distortion from the heat, and squeezed. 1, 2, both targets dropped. The gun fell silent. Through her headset, still linked to the comm net, a voice cut in. The SEAL commander attached to the battalion. Gravel rough, calm under pressure. Command, who's providing overwatch? Identify shooter. No reply, just static. Then another voice, younger, uncertain. Sir, I think it's Phantom 7. The net went silent. That name, the one she'd buried, carried a weight none of them could ignore. For years, it had been rumor, whispered in sniper school corridors. The ghost who hit targets beyond the confirmed range of the M40 platform. The one who never missed, but who vanished after a mission gone wrong. And now, that ghost was covering their retreat. In the command center miles away, officers stared at the drone feed. A single figure prone on the ridge, muzzle flashing in controlled rhythm. The colonel who had silenced her earlier stood frozen, realization spreading slow and painful across his face. But Alina wasn't thinking about any of that. She was inside the math now: distance, time, correction. Each shot was an equation solved in the quiet between explosions. Her sleeve slid up as she adjusted, revealing the small tattoo on her forearm, the Marine sniper emblem, the scoped rifle flanked by laurel. Earned, not given. Hidden too long. Her knuckles ached from recoil, dust clung to the sweat on her face, but she kept firing. Each round carved another line of survival into the chaos below. Minutes stretched into an hour. The valley transformed from a slaughterhouse to a standoff. Helicopter rotors thundered faintly in the distance, medevac and extraction, called in once the corridor opened wide enough to risk descent. Alina shifted again, spotting movement near the LZ, enemy fighters sprinting through smoke to set an RPG. She breathed out, sighted in, fired. The man dropped mid-stride. The rocket fell harmlessly short. First bird inbound, the SEAL commander's voice crackled. Keep that corridor clear. She already was. The chopper descended through a cloud of dust, its rotors whipping the smoke into chaos. Marines dashed toward it, dragging the wounded, covering each other with dwindling ammunition. Alina scanned every ridge, cutting down anything that moved toward them. Second bird inbound, the voice came again, steadier now. Phantom 7 has us covered. For the first time all night, something inside her chest loosened. Not pride, relief. Calculation meeting purpose. The geometry she'd seen in silence finally aligning with what mattered, lives still breathing. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The enemy was adapting, flanking around the north ridge. She caught the glint of a scope aimed straight at the LZ. She pivoted, but her magazine clicked empty. She didn't panic. She rolled sideways, reloaded by feel, and reacquired the target. Breath in, half exhale, squeeze. The opposing sniper jerked backward out of view. Silence again. Third bird away, someone shouted over the net. Casualties secured. Phantom 7, you still with us? Alina said nothing. She just kept scanning, her cheek pressed against the stock, heartbeat slow. The last helicopter lifted off, its blades whipping dust across the valley like a storm. For a long moment, the only sound left was wind. When she finally lowered the rifle, her hands trembled not from fear, but from exhaustion so deep it hollowed her bones. She'd been motionless for hours, her muscles locked in precision. Now every nerve screamed. She crawled backward from the ridge, careful not to silhouette herself against the skyline. Downhill was harder than the climb. Every step jarred her knees, every slip threatened to betray her position. But she moved anyway, because staying meant becoming part of the ridge forever. Halfway down, she stopped to listen. The gunfire had faded. The valley was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after impossible survival. Somewhere on the radio, the SEAL commander's voice broke the static. All units accounted for. Repeat, all 480 accounted for. 0 left behind. She closed her eyes. The words hit harder than any explosion. 0 left behind. For a long time she stayed crouched there, the rifle across her knees, the sky beginning to pale at the edges, dawn bleeding into the horizon. She could already hear the story forming, not hers, not really. Someone else would tell it. Someone else would take credit. Or maybe they wouldn't mention her at all. It didn't matter. What mattered was the math had worked. The angles had aligned. The voices on the radio were still alive. She touched the dog tag against her chest. Told you I'd stay steady, she whispered to the wind. Then she started walking back toward the compound. Each step was heavier now. Fatigue pressed down like armor she couldn't shed. Her knees shook, her vision blurred. But she didn't slow. The valley behind her was fading into morning, smoke dissolving into gold light, the kind of beauty that never belonged in war but sometimes appeared anyway, like forgiveness. When she reached the outer perimeter, the guards stared, speechless. Dust streaked her face. Her uniform was torn at the elbows. The rifle hung low, its barrel scorched from heat. No one asked where she'd been. They already knew. As she passed through the gate, Marines straightened instinctively, helmets in hand. The air felt different, thicker, quieter, heavy with realization. The woman they'd called dead weight had just rewritten the meaning of discipline. Alina kept her eyes forward. She wasn't angry. She wasn't proud. She was just tired and steady the way her father had taught her to be. Inside the compound, the colonel waited near the comms tent, posture rigid. His eyes tracked her every step. When she stopped in front of him, neither spoke. The silence between them was an ocean. "You disobeyed orders," he said finally. "Yes, sir." "You saved a battalion." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Behind them, helicopters touched down, carrying the men she'd kept breathing. Dust swirled around them like ghosts trying to find rest. Somewhere in that wind, a voice murmured over the radio, cracked with exhaustion and awe. "Phantom 7 carried us." Alina turned toward the sound, eyes distant. Her lips parted not to speak but to breathe, deep, slow, controlled. The kind of breath that always came before the next shot. Why do heroes always look guilty when they walk back alive? The sun was already high when she reached the armory. Its heat wrapped the compound in a hard white glare that made even the shadows feel sharp. Marines moved in slow, shell-shocked lines, faces drawn, uniforms dusted gray, eyes glazed with the strange quiet that comes after surviving what no one was supposed to. Helicopters thudded in the distance, each landing stirring up ghosts of the valley they just escaped. The air smelled of oil, blood, and disbelief. Somewhere, a medic shouted for plasma. Somewhere else, someone laughed too loudly, the kind of laughter that breaks instead of releases. Alina walked through it all, rifle slung low, step measured, expression unreadable. The compound she'd left in silence was a different place now. The same men who had once turned their backs in the chow hall now stepped aside without being told. No jokes, no words, just silence, thick, reverent, and a little afraid. When she passed the motor pool, a young corporal froze mid-stride. He was one of the ones who used to whisper dead weight when she walked by. Now his mouth worked like he wanted to say something, but no sound came. She gave him a small nod, the kind that says you don't owe me anything. He dropped his eyes and saluted anyway. Inside the operations tent, the hum of machines replaced the chaos of gunfire. The big screen still showed the valley, smoking, empty, surreal. Command staff clustered around the table, their posture rigid with the aftertaste of failure disguised as procedure. The colonel stood near the center, headset around his neck, jaw locked tight. When he saw her, something in his shoulders shifted. Not much, but enough to register. The room fell quiet as she approached. Every click of her boots sounded louder than it should have. She stopped 2 feet from him, rifle resting against her thigh, dust streaking her cheeks like war paint. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said, voice clipped, as if discipline could mask the tremor underneath. "Yes, sir." "You left the perimeter without authorization." "Yes, sir." "You engaged enemy combatants in a restricted zone." "Yes, sir." He stared at her for a long time. Around them, no one breathed. The silence built until it felt like a wall about to crack. Then, very quietly, he said, "And you saved 480 Marines." Alina didn't move. The words weren't triumph, they were an admission. He exhaled, the sound heavy. "Report to the Co's quarters at 1400. They'll want your statement." "Yes, sir." He started to turn away, then stopped. "Marquez." "Sir." "Don't clean the rifle yet." Her eyes flickered up. "Sir." He hesitated, jaw working. "Leave it as it is, evidence." She nodded once and walked out. Outside, the air hit her like heat off an engine. She made it halfway across the yard before her knees almost gave. Not from pain, she'd learned to ignore that, but from the sheer weight of stillness. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving only the echo of what she'd done. She found a crate in the shade behind the armory and sat, elbows on her knees, staring at nothing. The compound moved around her, voices, movement, machinery, but all of it sounded distant, muffled. Her hands, still dusty from the ridge, trembled slightly. She turned them palm up, studying the fine white scars that crossed her knuckles. Each one had a story, a scope burn, a ricochet, a training accident, a reminder that precision always came with pain. Sergeant Marquez. The voice pulled her back. It was the SEAL commander, broad-shouldered, uniform half open, eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He carried himself like a man who'd seen too much to care about rank. She stood automatically. "Sir." He stopped in front of her, studying her face for a long moment. "You were Phantom 7. It wasn't a question." She didn't answer. "I read the reports back then," he continued. "Didn't think they were true. Half the brass said you didn't exist." She said nothing, eyes fixed somewhere past his shoulder. He nodded slowly, understanding the silence for what it was. "You saved my men, all of them. We'll make sure that's known." Her voice was low, steady. "It's not about that, sir." "No," he said softly. "It never is, but it should be." He extended a hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, rough with grime and respect. As he walked away, she sat again, letting the moment pass through her. The compound felt different now, heavier, as if everyone was waiting for permission to feel proud without feeling guilty. In the distance, she could hear Marines telling the story already. Fragments carried on the wind. One shot, just one, dropped the whole nest. Phantom 7, man, she was on the ridge. We'd all be dead if she hadn't. Stories grow fast in places like this. They're the only things that move faster than bullets. She pulled her notebook from her vest and flipped it open to a blank page. Her pencil trembled once before steadying. She wrote, "Helmand, coordinates 43.29 north, 64.871 east, wind quartering west to east, 3 knots, range 910 meters, time on target." She stopped. For the first time, she didn't know how to finish the line. Her breath came shallow. The numbers didn't feel right anymore, not because they were wrong, but because they weren't enough. A shadow fell across the page. "You're writing it down already." It was Lance Corporal Vance, the same one who'd mocked her notebook weeks ago. His voice was softer now, careful. She looked up. "You remember what I told you, Vance?" He swallowed, that it wasn't for anyone else. She nodded. "Still is." He opened his mouth, closed it again. Then he said quietly, "Thank you." 2 words, no rank, no irony, just raw truth. She nodded once and he walked away. By afternoon, the debriefing room smelled of stale coffee and sweat. The co sat behind a metal desk, papers spread like a crime scene. The colonel stood off to the side, arms folded. A recorder clicked on. "State your full name and rank," the co said. "Sergeant Elena Marquez, United States Marine Corps." "Describe your actions between 0900 and 1200 hours." Elena took a breath. Her voice came even. "At approximately 09, I observed loss of comms with units in the valley. I confirmed enemy contact via drone feed. I requested permission to engage. Permission was denied. I proceeded to engage regardless." The co's pen stopped mid-scribble. "You're admitting to direct insubordination." "Yes, sir." "And why did you proceed?" She met his eyes. "Because waiting would have meant watching them die." The room went still. The colonel looked down, jaw clenched. The co tapped his pen, thinking. "You understand that by regulation, this could be grounds for court-martial." "I understand, sir." "And yet you're calm." Her tone didn't change. Regulations don't change geometry. The valley was a trap. They were in a kill box. I had the position, the range, the capability. There was no time to wait for clearance. The co leaned back, studying her. "You expect commendation for this?" "No, sir." "What do you expect?" She hesitated, then said simply, "Accuracy." The co blinked. "Accuracy." She nodded. "In the record, that's all." The colonel's voice broke the silence. "Sir, with respect, she's the reason they're all still breathing." The co didn't look at him. He just kept staring at her, trying to read something behind her eyes. Whatever he found there, it made him look away first. He clicked off the recorder. "Dismissed, Sergeant." She saluted, turned, and left. Outside, dusk had started to fall. The light bled orange over the compound, softening the edges of everything. The men were quieter now. No boasting, no laughter, just a strange stillness that felt like reverence learning how to breathe. Near the landing pad, she watched medics load the last of the wounded onto a transport. One Marine caught her eye, a young private, pale and shaking, arm bandaged. He lifted his good hand in a small salute. She returned it. Neither smiled. There wasn't room for that kind of emotion here. She walked back toward the barracks, boots scuffing dust. Each step echoed faintly. Her body ached in places she didn't have names for, but the ache was proof she was still human, not just the ghost they called Phantom 7. Inside her quarters, she closed the door and sat on the edge of her cot. The rifle lay across her lap, still dirty, the metal scarred from heat. She traced her finger along the barrel over the faint engraving, USMC, Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. She thought about what that meant. Faithful to what? Orders, doctrine, or to the lives entrusted to her aim. In her notebook, she began a new entry, not numbers this time, words. They called it insubordination, but sometimes obedience is just another word for waiting too long. Her hand hovered, then added another line. Patience saves, hesitation kills. She closed the book and set it aside. Outside, she could hear the sound of boots, the rhythmic stomp of formation. She stood, opened the door, and saw them, rows of Marines lined up along the yard, helmets off, heads high. The colonel stood at the front, eyes on her. When she stepped out, the formation snapped to attention. No command given, no order called, just instinct. The SEAL commander stepped forward, saluted sharply. "Phantom 7, he said, "the valley owes you." The words rippled through the ranks, low and solemn. Then, slowly, hands began to clap, hesitant at first, then stronger, rolling through the compound until the sound filled every corner. Not a cheer, a reckoning. Alina didn't bow, didn't smile. She just returned the salute, her hand trembling slightly before locking steady. When the clapping faded, the colonel approached. His voice was quiet. "You'll probably face a board of inquiry," he said. "I know, sir. They'll want to decide whether what you did was heroism or defiance." She looked past him toward the horizon, where the last light was fading over the valley. Maybe it was both. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's what duty really is. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of dust and burned oil from the battlefield. Alina's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "Sometimes," she said softly, "faith isn't about following orders. It's about knowing when to stop waiting for permission." The colonel studied her, then gave a single, solemn nod. As night fell over Helmand, the compound lights flickered on, bathing everything in pale gold. Alina stood still for a moment longer, feeling the weight of silence settle around her again. Not the silence of dismissal, not the silence of contempt. The silence of respect, the kind earned the hard way. She turned back toward the armory. Inside, she finally broke the colonel's earlier order. She cleaned the rifle. Each motion was slow, methodical, sacred. With every swipe of the cloth, the day receded. Gunfire, screams, smoke, until only the quiet rhythm remained. When the last piece clicked back into place, she whispered to the weapon the same way her father once had to her. "You did good." And for the first time since dawn, she let herself breathe. Not like a soldier, but like someone who'd carried too much and still chosen to keep walking. The notebook lay open beside her. She added one final line before the light went out. "Sometimes courage doesn't roar, it just refuses to wait." What happens when doing the right thing looks like a crime? The summons came at dawn. A corporal handed her a folded slip, nothing dramatic, just a single line in regulation print. Report to Command Operations 0700. Formal inquiry. She read it once, tucked it into her sleeve, and went back to tying her boots. No surprise, no dread, just inevitability. The Marines didn't ignore protocol, they dissected it. Every choice, every deviation, every heartbeat out of sync with the rulebook became an item for review. Outside, the morning was washed in dull gray. Helicopters idled on the pad, their blades ghosting through mist. Somewhere, a generator coughed. The compound smelled of diesel and sleep deprivation. She slung her rifle, clean now, gleaming silent, across her back. It wasn't comfort so much as balance. The weight of it grounded her. As she walked toward the headquarters tent, Marines along the way paused what they were doing. Not out of ceremony, out of something quieter. Recognition, maybe, or guilt. One sergeant she barely knew gave her a small nod. Another murmured, "Good luck, ma'am." She didn't answer. Luck was just another word for poor planning. Inside, the inquiry board waited. 3 officers behind a table, papers stacked neatly, a digital recorder blinking red. The colonel stood in the corner, silent, hands clasped behind his back. The senior officer, a brigadier with eyes like polished steel, motioned for her to sit. "Sergeant Marquez," he began, "you are aware of the purpose of this proceeding." "Yes, sir." "You engaged the enemy without authorization, contrary to standing rules of engagement. You crossed a restricted perimeter. You acted alone, without command coordination." "Yes, sir." "And you acknowledge this?" "Yes, sir." He studied her, trying to read her expression. She gave him nothing. "Why?" he asked finally. Her answer was simple: because they were dying. The colonel in the corner shifted, his jaw tightening. The brigadier's pen scratched against paper. "That's not a strategic justification, Sergeant." "No, sir," she said. "It's a human one." Silence stretched. Someone coughed. The brigadier tapped his pen against the folder. "You realize your actions, while tactically effective, directly violated command authority." "I do." "And you still believe you were correct?" She hesitated. The question wasn't about tactics. It was about faith, the kind that can't be written into manuals. "Sir," she said slowly, "I believe I was necessary." That stopped him, his pen stilled midair. "Necessary," he repeated. "Yes, sir. The choice wasn't between obeying and disobeying. It was between watching them die or stopping it. I had the position. I had the data. I didn't have the time to wait for permission." The colonel stepped forward. "With respect, sir, her calculations were exact. She broke the trap. The corridor she opened is the only reason we're sitting here discussing a miracle instead of a massacre." The brigadier looked from him to her, back again. "Miracle or not, rules exist for a reason." Alina's voice softened. "Yes, sir, but so do instincts." The younger officer on the board frowned. "Instinct doesn't win wars, Sergeant." She met his gaze. "No, sir, but hesitation loses them." The brigadier's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. The tension cracked, just slightly, enough for the truth to breathe. After a long pause, he said quietly, "You're dismissed, Sergeant. Wait outside." She stood, saluted, and walked out into the sunlight. The world outside felt sharper, the air cleaner, the kind of clarity that follows judgment, even if you don't know what the verdict is yet. She stood by the flagpole, watching the colors stir in the wind. The metal plate at the base read Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Faithful to what, though? Orders, honor, the men who laughed at her, the ones who survived because she didn't wait. She wasn't sure anymore. The colonel joined her a few minutes later, quiet as a shadow. "They're still deciding," he said. "I figured. You didn't do yourself any favors in there." "I wasn't trying to." He sighed. "You know what'll happen if they make it formal. Suspension, maybe worse." "I know." "Then why didn't you defend yourself?" She turned to him, her eyes tired but steady. "Because they weren't wrong." He frowned. What do you mean? I did break orders, she said. I did leave the perimeter. I did act alone. That's all true. But if I start arguing that disobedience is fine when you believe you're right, what happens next time? Someone else decides their gut matters more than command. That's how chaos starts. The colonel studied her face, searching for defiance maybe, but all he saw was truth. So what are you saying? I'm saying I don't need them to call it heroism. I just need them to call it what it was. He nodded slowly, the understanding heavy between them. You know, he said, almost to himself, the Corps doesn't know what to do with people like you. She gave a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. It never has. For the rest of the day she stayed in the armory, cleaning gear, reorganizing shelves, logging ammo counts, the mindless rhythm that kept her from thinking too hard. Outside, the compound buzzed with the sound of repair crews, generators, and whispered retellings of the story that had already started to grow its own mythology. Some said she'd hit targets at over a mile. Others swore she'd coordinated with drones through hacked frequencies. Someone even said she'd been shot twice and didn't stop firing. None of it was true. The truth never was enough for legend. By evening, she was alone again. The light through the armory window turned everything gold. Dust motes drifted like slow sparks. She sat at the workbench, hands folded over her notebook. Her rifle lay beside it clean, silent, patient. She flipped to a fresh page. For a long time she didn't write anything. Then in small, careful letters. Day after Helmand, 480 accounted for, 0 left behind, inquiry pending. She paused, then added, some debts can't be punished, they can only be carried. She closed the book, set her pencil down. That night the compound gathered for a memorial, not for the dead, but for the almost dead. For gratitude too heavy to name. A single field of candles flickered in the dirt courtyard, each one planted by a Marine who had walked out of that valley alive. Alina stood at the edge of the light, hands behind her back, face expressionless. The SEAL commander found her there. Thought you'd skip this, he said quietly. I almost did. He smiled faintly. They're not used to thanking ghosts. Neither am I. For a while they just watched the candles. Wind tugged at the flames, making them dance like nervous hearts. You ever wonder, he asked, why it's always the quiet ones who end up changing everything? She thought about that. Maybe because the loud ones are too busy being heard. He chuckled once, low and tired. You're not what they trained you to be. I'm exactly what they trained me to be, she said. They just forgot why they started training people like me in the first place. He nodded, understanding more than he admitted. They'll clear you, he said. They have to. They don't, she said, and it's okay if they don't. You really believe that? She looked at the row of flames stretching into the dark. If they punish me, it means the system still works the way it was built. But if even one of those men in the valley learns to trust their own eyes after this, then maybe it'll start to work the way it should. The SEAL commander was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, you talk like someone who already knows how this ends. She gave a small shrug. All stories end. The point isn't the ending, it's what survives it. He smiled faintly, eyes glinting in candlelight. And what survived yours? She watched the flames flicker in the desert wind. Patience, she said, and a heartbeat. 2 days later, the verdict came quietly. No parade, no announcement, just a sealed envelope slid under her door. She opened it and read the single paragraph inside. Actions conducted outside chain of command, deemed a violation of operational protocol, formal reprimand issued, no further punitive action recommended, file to remain classified. In plain language, she'd been forgiven but not celebrated. She folded the paper once and slipped it into her notebook. Outside, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The valley beyond the horizon glowed faintly under morning light, a place both cursed and sanctified now. A supply convoy rolled past, engines rumbling. One of the Marines on the truck bed looked down at her and gave a small salute. She returned it automatically, then watched the vehicles fade into dust. For a moment, she wondered what would happen when she went home. If she went home, would anyone there understand? Would they believe it wasn't heroism that drove her but simple arithmetic, wind, distance, duty? Maybe it didn't matter. She picked up her rifle case, slung it over her shoulder, and walked toward the range. The targets waited, metal silhouettes catching light. She set up her mat, unfolded her bipod, and lay prone. The routine felt sacred again: breath, focus, aim. She fired once, the steel rang. Then again. Each shot echoed against the hills like punctuation marks in a story only she knew how to read. She wasn't chasing validation. She was maintaining truth, one round at a time. Later that evening, a supply clerk found her notebook on the bench, left open to a new entry. Orders will always tell you what not to do. Instinct tells you what must be done. Somewhere between the two is duty. And beneath that, a single final line written smaller, almost hidden. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. What does a soldier do when the war finally stops listening to her? The plane home was loud with engines and silence. 47 Marines strapped into webbed seats, helmets resting on their laps, eyes fixed on nothing. The desert was a thin tan line shrinking through the window behind them. For most, the worst was over. For Alina Marquez, it never ended that cleanly. She sat near the tail, notebook in her lap, hands still calloused from a rifle she hadn't fired in days. Every vibration of the aircraft felt like a heartbeat she couldn't quiet. The others joked softly, trading stories about beers waiting for them, promises made and half kept. She smiled when they looked her way but didn't join in. They called her Sergeant again now, always with weight in their voices, not mockery, respect laced with apology. It should have felt good. It didn't. As the wheels lifted from Afghan soil, she looked down one last time at the ridges, those same folds of earth she'd memorized by heart, the same geometry that had nearly buried half the battalion. The valley was empty now, quiet as an erased story, but in her mind she could still hear the echoes. The burst of gunfire, the static on the radio, the silence after a heartbeat ended. The flight lasted 16 hours. Time stretched, folded, dissolved. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the aircraft hummed like a lullaby too tired to finish. She wrote in her notebook, the pencil dull from use. Altitude 30,000, pressure steady, wind negligible. She stopped. Those were numbers, not thoughts. They'd always been her language, controlled, measurable. But the war had taught her things that didn't fit into equations. She crossed out the line and wrote instead. The hardest shots are the ones no one sees. When the wheels touched down in California, the men cheered, clapped backs, shouted names. Alina just breathed out slowly, as if exhaling sand. Camp Pendleton was the opposite of Helmand: green, ordered, alive. The first thing she noticed was color, real color. Grass that didn't crunch underfoot, sky that didn't burn. She should have felt relief. Instead, everything looked too clean, too far removed from what she'd left behind. The Corps moved fast. Paperwork replaced bullets. Evaluations replaced missions. Within a week, she'd been reassigned to a training detachment, stateside sniper instruction, evaluation role, non-deployable. Officially, it was a commendation. Unofficially, it was exile. The letter of reassignment read, operational expertise reassigned to training and advisory functions, pending further review. Translation: you did what we couldn't explain. Better to keep you where explanations aren't required. The classroom smelled of marker ink and coffee. Rows of young recruits, most barely 20, leaned forward in folding chairs while she spoke about wind drift, bullet drop, range estimation. They watched her like she was myth. She spoke like she was memory. "When you're on glass," she told them, "the rifle doesn't lie, but you might." A few recruits frowned, confused. "You'll tell yourself the shot's good," she continued, "that the math is right, that the wind won't change, but the truth doesn't care about your confidence. It only answers to patience." One of the recruits raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you know when to shoot?" She looked at him for a long moment. "When not shooting costs more." They wrote that down. She didn't tell them what it had cost her. After class, she walked alone to the range. The Pacific wind was different from the desert, cooler, more forgiving. But it still carried that same whisper when it hit the barrel just right. She lay prone, aimed at a steel silhouette half a mile away, and fired. The clang echoed faint and hollow. Her spotter, a sergeant half her age, said quietly, "Ma'am, I've never seen a steadier trigger." She didn't look up. Steady doesn't mean peaceful. He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. At night, her apartment on base was small but neat. Bed made, rifle locked, notebook on the table. Routine was the only thing she trusted now. She'd clean the same weapon she no longer needed, write the same numbers no one would read. But sometimes, when the wind caught the curtains, the sound reminded her of rotor blades, of the valley's dust spiraling into her lungs. Sleep rarely followed. She started running before dawn, before the noise of the world woke up, miles through fog and silence. The rhythm of her boots on pavement replaced the trigger's pull, each step a kind of penance, each breath a count. On weekends, she went to the range alone. No uniform, just her and the rifle. The steel targets at 800 meters were her only conversation. There were rumors about her, of course. There always are. Some said she'd been reprimanded. Others whispered she'd been awarded secretly, her commendation buried in a classified folder. She didn't confirm either. Let them guess. Myths protect the truth better than facts ever could. One evening, after the last trainee left, the colonel from Helmand appeared at the edge of the range. He'd aged in months, lines deeper, voice rougher. He didn't salute. Neither did she. Some bonds outgrow formality. "Training the next generation?" he asked. "Trying." He nodded. "They know who you are. They know what I teach. That's enough." He studied her. "You could have taken the easy path, you know. DC desk job, media face. They love stories like yours when the right people write them." "I'm not a story," she said quietly. He smiled without humor. "You are, whether you like it or not." She went back to cleaning her rifle. Stories end, soldiers don't. He watched her work. "You miss it." "The noise?" she asked. "The chaos?" He shook his head. "The purpose." Her hands froze on the cleaning rod. The word hit harder than he knew. Purpose was what she'd traded for peace, and she wasn't sure it was a fair exchange. After a moment she said, "I miss the clarity." He understood. In combat, right and wrong were sharp things. Here, everything blurred. Before leaving, he said quietly, "The Corps doesn't know it yet, but it needs more of you." She didn't answer. She just kept cleaning. The rod scraped softly, like a clock ticking down to something she couldn't name. Months passed. The story of Helmand faded into rumor and classified briefings. The battalion redeployed. The headlines moved on. But sometimes, late at night, letters found their way to her desk. Short ones, folded unevenly, sent through channels not meant for mail. "You don't know me, but I was there. You saved my fire team." "Heard the story in Kabul. They still talk about Phantom 7. You made me believe discipline isn't weakness." She never replied, but she kept them all folded between the pages of her notebook. One letter came with a small photograph, grainy, taken in daylight. A group of Marines standing on a ridge. Laughter caught mid-breath. The caption scribbled on the back read, "You cut this sky open for us." She stared at it for a long time, then tucked it away and went back to her cleaning ritual. It was during one of those late nights that the base chaplain stopped by. He was new, younger, earnest in a way that hadn't yet been worn down by the core. He stood awkwardly at her door, cap in hand. "Ma'am, I'm visiting veterans of Helmand, just checking in." She let him in. The apartment smelled faintly of oil and paper. He looked around, the rifle case, the notebook, the bare walls. Not much of a home. "It's enough." He hesitated. "May I ask something personal?" She shrugged. "You can ask." "Do you ever regret it?" Her answer came slow. "No, but I regret needing to." He frowned, not following. She looked past him, eyes distant. That moment, the decision, it wasn't bravery, it was math. Angles, distance, wind, but every equation needs a variable. Mine was time, and time ran out, so I pulled the trigger. The chaplain nodded quietly. "And you saved lives." She gave a faint smile. "That doesn't make the sound any quieter." He wanted to say something comforting, something holy, but some silences weren't meant to be filled. He just placed a small silver cross on her table and left without a word. After he was gone, she picked it up, turned it over in her fingers and set it next to her father's dog tag. Both metal, both heavy, both carved by duty. Months later, during a training demonstration, she found herself standing behind a new recruit, a girl barely 19, hands trembling as she adjusted the scope. Elena knelt beside her. "Breathe," she said softly. "I can't steady it," the recruit whispered. "You don't steady the rifle," Elena said. "You steady yourself." The girl exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The steel rang. Elena smiled faintly. "Good, now do it again." The girl turned, surprised. "Until I hit the same spot." "No," Elena said, "until you know why you did." The recruit blinked, confused but listening. Elena watched her through the rising heat. The world kept making new soldiers. Maybe that was how it healed, by giving the next one a cleaner chance. When the demonstration ended, the applause was polite. The colonel was there again, observing. After everyone left, he approached quietly. "They're recommending you for an advisory posting," he said. "Langley, civilian liaison on training doctrine." She wiped her hands on a rag. "That's a desk job." "It's influence," he said. "It's voice." She shook her head. "Voices echo, I prefer impact." He sighed. "You'll disappear if you stay here." She looked at him. "I already did." That night, she wrote one last entry before closing her notebook for good. "War doesn't end when you come home. It ends when you stop needing to prove why you did what you had to." She placed her father's dog tag on top of it, folded the pages shut, and turned off the light. Outside, the ocean wind howled softly against the glass, a reminder that peace had its own kind of noise. And somewhere, far from Helmand, far from the dust and the heat, and the sound of her own breath through the scope, Sergeant Elena Marquez finally slept. Not because the world had forgiven her, but because she had learned how to forgive herself. When the war finally lets you go, what part of you stays behind? It had been 5 years since Helmand. The world had moved on exactly the way she'd expected it to, quietly, efficiently, without her. The headlines that once carried words like miracle extraction and zero casualties had been replaced by new stories, new battles, new names. The valley she'd once memorized down to every fold of earth existed now only in a redacted report, and the thin scar that ran along her forearm where shale had bitten through her skin. Elena Marquez lived inland now, 2 hours north of San Diego, in a town small enough that nobody asked questions. A single-story house with peeling white paint, a porch that faced west, and a wind that carried the smell of salt when the air shifted right. No uniforms, no salutes, just space. She taught marksmanship 3 days a week at a community range, retirees, weekend hobbyists, sometimes teenagers brought by fathers who wanted them to learn discipline. They called her Ms. Marquez. No one said sergeant, she didn't correct them. She learned to move through life like she moved through a firefight, measured, silent, alert. But some habits refused to die. She still counted breaths before she spoke, still studied wind through tree branches, still slept with the window cracked open, listening for what wasn't there. The war was gone, but the geometry remained. Every morning she rose before dawn, coffee black, jogged 2 miles down the coast road, stretch, right, not numbers anymore, just fragments of thought, lines that came like whispers. Distance teaches mercy. Silence is its own kind of noise. You can't unsteady what was trained to stay calm. The notebook was different now, leather-bound, pages soft from salt air. She kept it on the table beside her father's dog tag and the small silver cross the chaplain had left behind. Sometimes she'd touch both at once, the metal warm from sunlight, and think about how faith and duty had always felt made of the same weight. One afternoon, a young woman came to the range, a Marine fresh from basic, uniform still crisp, eyes bright with the kind of confidence Alina remembered having before Helmand burned it down. "Ma'am, I was told you could help me qualify higher for sniper selection," she said. Alina studied her stance, her grip, the restless energy in her shoulders. "Name?" "Corporal Riley." Alina nodded. "Show me." The girl fired. Decent groupings, tight but erratic. She was fighting herself more than the rifle. Alina stepped beside her. "You're forcing it." "I'm steady," Riley said quickly. Alina shook her head. "Steady isn't stiff, it's trust. Try again." The girl exhaled, squeezed, missed farther. "Why'd you miss?" Alina asked. "Wind." "No doubt." Riley frowned. "Doubt." Alina's tone softened. "You hesitated between knowing and believing. The shot lives in that hesitation." The next round struck center steel. The sound rang clean across the range. Riley lowered the rifle, eyes wide. "How'd you?" "Don't look for secrets," Alina said. "Look for stillness." The girl grinned. "You ever deploy, ma'am?" Alina paused. The sun caught the edge of her sleeve, glinting off the faint tattoo half hidden there, the laurel-flanked scope. "Once," she said quietly. "A long time ago." Riley nodded, unaware she was standing in front of the ghost of Phantom 7. When the girl left, Alina sat alone at the bench, watching dust drift through late light. She felt something stir, pride maybe, or recognition. The world kept producing new soldiers. Maybe that was its way of saying you mattered once. Evenings were the hardest. The quiet pressed in, thick and alive. She kept the television low, mostly for the company of voices she didn't have to answer. Some nights she'd walk down to the pier, lean against the rail, and let the ocean wind whip her hair across her face. The waves never stopped moving. Neither did the memories. Sometimes the wind carried the metallic smell of cordite. Sometimes she swore she heard rotor blades buried in the crash of surf. Her body would tense, hands twitching toward a rifle that wasn't there. Then she'd breathe, slow and steady, counting the beats until the illusion broke. She learned not to fight the ghosts, just to let them pass through like weather. One morning a letter arrived from the Department of the Navy, plain envelope, no return name, inside a single sheet. In recognition of actions conducted during Operation Silver Canyon, Helmand Province, the department has authorized commendation for valor, record to be amended accordingly. No medal, no ceremony, just words belated and sterile. She read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope and slid it under her father's dog tag. She didn't need their correction. She'd already earned her truth. That evening she went back to the range and fired until the sun dropped behind the hills. Each shot steadier than the last, each one a quiet refusal to forget. Winter came slow that year. Rain turned the dust into clay. One night lightning cracked over the horizon and the sound threw her awake, heart racing, hands clawing for a weapon that wasn't there. She sat up, breath shallow, the room dark except for the faint glow from the window. For a moment she was back in Helmand, ridge under her cheek, smoke in her lungs, radio screaming static. Then the thunder rolled again, farther away this time, and the illusion collapsed. She pressed her palms to her eyes until color returned behind them. The notebook lay open on the nightstand. She grabbed the pencil and wrote through the tremor. The past isn't gone. It's just waiting for silence to sound like itself again. She left the lights on the rest of the night. The next week an invitation arrived, official, embossed, Marine Corps Memorial Service. Guest speaker, Sergeant Elena Marquez, Ret. She almost threw it away, but something in the phrasing Ret, not former, made her pause. They were asking her to speak about discipline under pressure. Not about disobedience, not about Helmand, but she knew that's what they really wanted, the story nobody could stop telling even when it had no ending. 2 weeks later, she stood behind a podium in a hall full of uniforms. Rows of young Marines in spotless dress blues, officers in the front, cameras discreet but everywhere. The colonel from Helmand sat near the back, arms folded, expression unreadable. She looked down at her notes, 4 lines written on a small card. Nothing rehearsed, nothing safe. She took a slow breath the same way she always had before a shot. "When I was your age," she began, voice calm but low, "I thought discipline meant silence. That patience meant waiting for orders. That courage was noise you made so others could hear it." The room was still. Even the air seemed to lean closer. "I was wrong," she said. "Discipline isn't silence. It's listening to your instinct, to the people beside you, to the truth that doesn't care what the rulebook says. Patience isn't waiting. It's preparation. And courage is doing what must be done even when you know no one will ever thank you for it." Her throat tightened. She let the pause breathe. In Helmand, 480 Marines came home because someone acted when the book said wait. That wasn't defiance. That was duty, stripped of comfort, stripped of certainty. The kind that leaves you alone after the noise stops. She glanced toward the colonel. His eyes met hers, steady. "So if you remember anything," she said softly, "remember this. Rules keep us alive. But sometimes someone has to step outside them to remind us why." She stopped there. No applause line, no story's end, just a quiet bow of her head. For a heartbeat, the room stayed silent. Then, slowly, hands came together. Not the sharp rhythm of parade claps, but a low, deliberate cadence that filled the space with something older than ceremony. Respect. When it was over, she walked out through the back corridor into the cold air. The colonel caught up to her near the exit. "You finally told it," he said. "Not all of it," she replied. "Enough." He smiled faintly. "You know they're going to quote that speech for years." She shrugged. "Then let them quote the silence between the lines. That's where the truth lives." That night she drove back along the coast highway, windows down, the ocean's breath cold on her face. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running from something. The road curved west, and she followed it until it ended at the cliffs overlooking the Pacific. The wind howled, strong and relentless. She stepped out, the dog tag glinting against her throat. Below, waves shattered against rock, loud, endless, alive. She thought about the men she'd saved, the ones who'd written letters, the ones who never would. About the officers who doubted her. About her father, somewhere beyond sound and distance, proud in his quiet way. She whispered to the wind, barely audible, "I did what you taught me, Dad. I didn't wait." The waves answered in their own language, crash, retreat, return. Always return. Later, back home, she opened her notebook to the final page. Only one line waited there, written weeks ago. "Sometimes courage doesn't roar. It just refuses to wait." She added one more beneath it, her handwriting slower now, steadier. "And when the world forgets, that refusal becomes legacy." She closed the book, turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, listening. Not for gunfire, not for commands, but for the steady, human rhythm of her own breath. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn cut through the night. It sounded like a signal or maybe a farewell. She smiled to herself, tired but peaceful. Because for the first time since the valley, She understood what it meant to be steady without aiming. And that was enough. How long does it take for a name to turn into a story? 10 years had passed since the valley. By now, most of the Marines who had crawled through that dust were scattered across new assignments, civilian jobs, families that had learned not to flinch at the word deployment. The world had rewritten itself half a dozen times, but in the corners of bars near bases, in classrooms where instructors told cautionary tales, and in the quiet of mess halls after long patrols, someone always ended up saying her name. Not loudly, not like a legend, more like a password whispered between those who'd seen the edge. Phantom 7. No rank, no unit, just the number, the ghost who broke a kill box. Sometimes the story got tangled. Different valley, different weapon, impossible distances. Every telling changed the shape of it, but the heart stayed the same. One sniper, alone, refused to let 480 Marines die because the book said wait. Alina never corrected any version. She wasn't even sure she was the same woman they were talking about anymore. She lived outside Santa Fe now, a small adobe house baked into the desert like it had been waiting for her all along. The air was dry, the horizon honest. When the wind came, it carried sand instead of memory. She ran a training program for veterans, marksmanship, yes, but mostly transition. The kind of space where silence didn't feel like failure. Mornings started with coffee strong enough to wake ghosts, afternoons with lectures about breathing, focus, patience. She rarely mentioned Helmand. When recruits asked, she just said, "You already know the story. You're here to learn the reason." The walls of her office were bare except for two frames, her father's photograph in uniform and a map of the Helmand Valley, creased, sun-bleached, folded so many times the paper looked like scar tissue. She never replaced it. It was a reminder that even broken things can still teach. One spring, a new instructor joined the program, a Marine major named Carson Reed. Mid-30s, sharp, restless, the kind of officer who spoke like he was still debriefing a mission. He'd been part of a recent engagement in Syria, a fight that nearly mirrored Helmand. Bad intel, encircled unit, someone breaking procedure to pull them out. He'd heard her name before, everyone had, but he didn't believe ghosts until he met one. "You're Marquez," he said the first day, shaking her hand like he was testing rumor against reality. "I used to be," she replied. He grinned. "We studied your case at Quantico, Marquez exception. They teach it now, operational autonomy under crisis. You know that, right?" She raised an eyebrow, didn't know they'd given it a title. They had to call it something. Couldn't keep saying disobedience, that worked. He laughed, she didn't. After a beat he added softly, "It's doctrine now. You changed the manual." She looked away toward the horizon. Took them long enough. In the evenings they'd sit outside after classes, the desert turning purple with twilight. Carson would talk about new recruits, how they rushed, how they mistook loudness for leadership. Alina listened more than she spoke. When she did, her voice came low, measured, the same rhythm she'd used talking to herself through rifle scope breath. "One day," she told him, "you'll learn that hesitation and thoughtfulness aren't the same thing." He nodded. "You ever miss it?" She smiled faintly. "Every day I don't." That night he found her sitting alone in the classroom, the lights off, the map of Helmand faint in the moonlight. She was tracing the ridges with her finger like she was still confirming wind calls from memory. "You still carry it," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "You don't put something like this down. You just learn how to balance the weight." Years continued their slow drift. Students came and went, some staying to teach, some disappearing into lives quieter than they'd expected. Alina watched them all with the calm pride of someone who'd learned that legacy isn't a statue, it's motion passed forward. Every so often, a letter would arrive from overseas. New wars, same mistakes, but hidden between the reports were tiny victories. A lieutenant who'd trusted his instinct instead of a delayed command. A sniper who'd waited for wind instead of ego. Each letter ended with the same line. We remembered the rule you taught us. Patience isn't waiting, it's preparation. She kept them stacked in a wooden box under her desk, tied with cord. Not trophies, just proof that something she'd done once in silence was still echoing. One autumn afternoon, the training yard was alive with sound, rifle cracks echoing off canyon walls, boots crunching gravel. She watched a young veteran named Lewis struggle through a long-range drill. He'd been infantry, too tour, too many ghosts behind his eyes. Every miss tightened his shoulders until frustration bled into anger. He slammed the bolt, cursed under his breath. It's useless, I can't focus. Elena walked up behind him calm, then stopped trying. He turned, ma'am. Focus isn't something you chase, she said. It's what's left when you stop running from noise. She knelt beside him, adjusted his stance slightly, the way her father once had for her. Breathe, don't control it, listen to it, it already knows what you need. He closed his eyes, fired, the steel sang. He looked at her, surprised. How do you keep it together, after everything? She thought about the valley, about the roar of helicopters, about the silence that followed. I don't, she said. I just accept that I never will. That's the trick, they call it peace, but really it's permission to keep carrying it. That night she walked alone through the range after everyone left. The stars over New Mexico were sharper than the ones over Helmand, but they spoke the same language. She lay back in the sand, the desert cool against her spine, and listened to the wind slide across the dunes. It sounded like breath through a barrel, the sound that used to separate life and death. She whispered into the dark, not as confession, not as prayer. I'm still steady, Dad. A shooting star cut across the horizon. She smiled. It felt like acknowledgement. The next morning she found Carson waiting with a sealed envelope. From HQ, he said. They're asking you to speak again. Command conference, leadership ethics. She laughed quietly. They still think I'm going to teach them rules. He shrugged. Maybe they finally understand that breaking them the right way is part of the job. She looked at the envelope a long time before sliding it into her pocket. Maybe. A week later she stood on another stage, this time in a lecture hall filled with officers and cadets. Her hair was streaked with gray now, her posture still impossibly straight. She spoke without notes. There's a moment every soldier meets, she began, when obedience and conscience collide. You won't see it coming. You'll just feel everything slow down. And in that space, you'll realize the book was written by people who never stood where you're standing. She paused, letting the words settle. When that moment comes, remember this. You're not choosing between right and wrong. You're choosing between what's written and what's true. Someone in the audience whispered, That's the Phantom 7 doctrine. Elena smiled. Call it whatever you want, just remember it's paid for. She stepped down from the stage to the same kind of applause as before, quiet, deliberate, more gratitude than noise. Outside, the air smelled of rain. She stood for a while watching cadets file out, each one carrying notebooks full of phrases they'd quote later. She hoped they'd understand them before they needed to. That night she sat on her porch, notebook open to a blank page. For the first time in years, she didn't know what to write. Then slowly, her hand began to move. Legacy isn't being remembered, it's being repeated. She set the pencil down, leaned back, and let the desert wind turn the page for her. 2 months later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a folded flag and a note in careful handwriting. Ma'am, I was one of the recruits you trained. Last month our unit was pinned near Al Raqqa. Command froze. We didn't. We used what you taught. Everyone made it home. We call it the Marquez Protocol now. Thought you'd want to know. She sat with the letter for a long time, fingers tracing the words. For a moment, she imagined the valley again. Not Helmand, not Raqqa, just the endless line of human stubbornness against impossible odds. And she felt something close to peace. She refolded the flag, placed it beside her father. and whispered, "Zero left behind." That night rain swept across the desert in sheets. She stood in the doorway, watching it fall, the smell of wet sand rising like memory. The world blurred into silver. She thought of all the men and women she'd trained, the lives connected by invisible threads of patience and defiance. Somewhere out there, someone was alive because she hadn't waited. That was enough. She picked up her notebook one last time and wrote under the previous line, "The measure of a soldier isn't how loud they're remembered. It's how quietly their lessons endure." Then she closed it and let the rain drown the silence outside. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a bridge between what was done and what still could be. How do you measure a life that never asked to be remembered? 25 years after Helmand, Sergeant Elena Marquez woke before dawn as she always had. The desert outside her window was the color of bone and light. Silence, soft but alive, filled the small adobe house. She moved slowly now, her joints stiff, her gait careful, but her hands were still steady. The kind of steadiness that doesn't fade with age because it isn't muscle, it's memory. The rifle was gone, donated to the Marine Corps Museum years ago. She stood quietly during the unveiling, saying nothing, watching a curator talk about precision, valor, a historic act of tactical independence. They polished it too bright. It looked wrong, too clean. Rifles weren't meant to shine, they were meant to understand weight. She'd smiled politely, shaken hands, signed a few photographs for people who didn't really know her. Then she'd gone home and slept for 12 hours straight, the longest sleep since the war. Now in her 60s, she lived alone near the edge of a veterans' community. Her days were gentle: coffee, sunrise, letters from former students who still called her ma'am, garden work that kept her grounded in things that grew. She still taught twice a month. No rifles anymore, just lessons. Philosophy, leadership, the anatomy of silence. Her class was called the space between orders. It filled every semester. That morning the wind came early. She opened the window and let it in. The air smelled like rain, though the sky was clear. She poured coffee, black as always, and sat by the window, notebook open to a new page. The pages were fragile now, nearly translucent, filled with handwriting that had evolved over decades, from sharp to slow, from technical to tender. Every page carried a memory like a scar. Numbers, thoughts, fragments of confession. Today she wrote just a few words. "Peace is the sound of no one waiting for you anymore." She smiled at the simplicity of it. It wasn't sadness, it was truth. There was beauty in being unneeded. It meant the world had healed enough to keep moving. Later that afternoon, a visitor arrived. She saw him coming up the dirt path, tall, clean-cut, wearing civilian clothes but with posture that betrayed years of discipline. When he reached the porch, he hesitated, hat in hand. "Ms. Marquez." She nodded. "You've come a long way, I can tell by the dust." He smiled nervously. "My name's Captain Riley. My mother trained under you, Corporal Riley, years ago." Elena's eyebrows lifted. The kid who couldn't steady her breath. He laughed. "That's her. She's retired now. Runs a clinic for veterans up north." Elena nodded approvingly. "Good for her. She learned faster than most." "She did," Riley said. "She used to talk about you all the time, about patience, about listening to silence. She told me you taught her that stillness isn't weakness." Elena leaned back, eyes narrowing with the faintest amusement. She remembered that line. "She built a life around it," he said. "So did I." He handed her a small folder. "I'm here on behalf of the Corps. We're updating the Leadership Ethics Manual again. There's a section named after you now, the Marquez Principle." She frowned slightly. "Another doctrine." "Not doctrine," he said. "Perspective, it says. When hesitation costs lives, integrity becomes instinct. The Marquez Principle, act when right, is clearer than safe." She read the line, quiet for a long time. "Sounds heavier than it needs to be." "It's saved people," he said softly. "We've used it more times than I can count." She handed the folder back. Keep it. The paper matters less than the people who remember why it was written. He hesitated, then added, there's a ceremony next month, a memorial for tactical pioneers. They'd like you to attend, to speak. She shook her head gently. Let the young ones speak. My time for words ended the day I fired my last round. Riley looked at her, admiration soft in his face. Then at least let them honor you. She smiled faintly. They already did, they learned. He didn't argue. He just nodded, saluted, not formally but from somewhere deeper, and left her there on the porch, wind tugging at the edge of her notebook. That night, Alina watched the sunset from her porch chair. The sky bled into violet and gold, the desert swallowing the light like an old friend. She thought about the faces she'd met, the names she'd carried, the quiet moments when choice and cost became the same thing. She remembered the inquiry room, the colonel's face, the quiet verdict, the folded reprimand. She remembered every Marine who'd walked away from that valley alive, the sound of their laughter days later, the letters she'd received, the ones she'd never answered. So many lives had come from one decision, not heroic, not noble, just necessary. She spoke softly to the wind. That's all it ever was, necessary. Later, the moon rose full, bright as a rifle scope under desert stars. She couldn't sleep, so she walked to the range at the far end of the property. The targets were still there, old steel silhouettes painted white, weathered with bullet scars. She hadn't fired in years. Her hands brushed the cold barrel of a student's practice rifle left in the shed. Out of habit, she checked the chamber, adjusted the sight, lay prone on the mat. The weight of the weapon was familiar. So was the silence that followed. She took a slow breath, not to aim, but to remember. Through the scope the world narrowed. One target, one horizon, one heartbeat. She whispered, wind steady, distance known, time clear. She didn't pull the trigger. She didn't need to. The shot already lived in her memory. She smiled and set the rifle down. A week later, the neighbors found her sitting on that same porch chair, coffee mug empty beside her, notebook open on her lap. The wind had turned the pages until it stopped on the last one. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, still steady. For years I thought survival meant endurance. It doesn't. It means understanding why you endured at all. And beneath that, a smaller line, the same one she'd written decades before, now rewritten with age-softened clarity. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She was gone quietly as she'd lived. No struggle, no ceremony, just the kind of silence that carries its own peace. Weeks later, her funeral was held at the base chapel in Oceanside. Small, private, unannounced. A few familiar faces, Colonel Wright, Major Reed, Corporal now Dr. Riley, and a handful of Marines who'd once trained under her. No fanfare. Just folded flags and the echo of slow boots on tile. They laid her notebook beside her dog tag in the casket. No medals. She refused them years ago. Medals weigh less than mistakes, she'd once said. Keep me light. When the bugle played, the sound rolled through the chapel like a breath she'd been holding for decades. Outside, the flag snapped in the wind. The colonel spoke quietly at the podium. She taught us that obedience has limits, but honor doesn't. That silence can lead. And that sometimes, doing what's right means standing alone long enough for the world to catch up. No one clapped. No one moved. The silence afterward was the purest tribute they could have given her. Months later, a new plaque appeared at the Marine Corps Museum beneath her old rifle. It didn't list battles or ranks or awards. Just words she'd once written in her notebook, engraved in brass. Orders tell you what not to do. Instinct tells you what must be done. Somewhere between the two is duty. Visitors stopped there often. Some lingered in front of the display longer than others. They said the same thing as they walked away. She must have been something. They were right. But even then, they only knew the story. Not the woman who refused to wait. Not the sniper who traded her voice for 480 heartbeats that weren't hers. Years later, at a leadership academy, a young cadet stood before a class. He quoted something from memory, words passed down like gospel. When hesitation costs lives, integrity becomes instinct. That's the Marquez principle. Another cadet raised her hand. Did she really exist? The instructor smiled. Maybe she's all of us when we stop waiting for permission. And in that answer, Alina Marquez lived again, quietly, endlessly, where courage still meant listening before acting. The desert wind carried her name a little farther that night, whispering through rifles, notebooks, and the hearts of those who had once stood where orders ended and conscience began. And somewhere in that unseen space between silence and duty, her story kept breathing, unloud, unwavering, unfinished. Because some echoes aren't meant to fade. They're meant to remind. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.